The fighter hunted without firing. Over the black water off Ishima in August 1945, a Northrop P-61 Black Widow named Lady in the Dark slid in behind a Japanese fighter so low the prop wash shredded the sea. The radar operator watched the green pip swell on the SCR-720 scope and said, "Hold it." The pilot eased closer, never touching the trigger. The enemy yanked too hard, clipped the waves, and vanished in spray. Two Americans, one voice, one set of steady hands turned night itself into a weapon. That is how the United States made darkness ours. We didn't stumble into this, we engineered it. We took Britain's hard-won lesson, ground-controlled interception, and built a uniquely American system, rugged radios that worked in monsoon air, mobile radar stations that could be up by sundown, and purpose-built night fighters. The P-61 carried the SCR 720 inches, its blunt nose, a pulsing heart that saw through cloud and moonless black. By war's end, Black Widows destroyed 127 enemy aircraft across theaters, proof that our idea scaled like industry. Numbers like that are not luck. They are what a free people can do when science and sweat move together. Picture the crew that night. Two Americans with call signs but ordinary ages, one barely out of high school. The cockpit smelled of hot Bakelite and hydraulic fluid. The operator kept his voice flat because flat saved lives. Range 8, 7, he's turning. The pilot flew on instruments, trusting a voice more than his eyes. That trust is an American thing. Farm kids learned it on ball teams and in barns. In 1945, it lived in a radar hut and a cockpit over the Ryukyus. The system worked because the people believed in each other. The enemy felt the shock first, then fear. Japanese crews had trained to make night their ally. They cut engines, flew low, painted their aircraft dark green, and counted on silence to hide them. But American radar did not blink. Controllers in sweating tents plotted bearings and heights like chess masters, then talked fighters onto perfect intercept angles. Nights that once felt safe turned hostile. Every sweep of the antenna pulled the mesh tighter. An unseen net stretched from Bougainville to Okinawa, from coral airstrips to carrier decks. Here is the bridge to even greater power. We took this hunt and made it repeatable. The 548th Night Fighter Squadron that flew Lady in the Dark did not perform a magic trick. It executed a method. Vector calls sounded like stage cues. Turn starboard. Come left 2 to 5 degrees. Commit. The airplane weighed over 30,000 pounds loaded, but the radar let it move like a cat. On the ground, Seabees kept generators humming. Radiomen kept circuits dry. Cooks fed men who slept in shifts between alerts. The miracle wasn't one airplane. It was a whole country operating through one airplane. Here's a holy shit fact that still makes pilots grin. Lady in the Dark forced down 2 enemy aircraft without firing a shot in separate incidents in the final days. A fighter killed with position alone. At night. That wasn't cruelty. That was control. It meant we knew where the enemy was before he knew where he wasn't safe. It meant our pilots could fly on gauges inches from the edge and keep their nerve. It meant our operators could read a breathing heartbeat on a cathode tube and turn it into a victory. Precision at midnight. Mercy at sunrise. Listen to a prisoner's voice for the human truth. A Japanese airman captured in the Ryukyus told his interrogator, "I thought night hid me. Your radar saw through the ocean spray." 15 words that carry a continent. We built machines that changed how an enemy felt in his chest. When a foe admits he fears an American technology backed by the teamwork to use it, you are hearing more than fear. You are hearing deterrence taking shape in real time. The radar room became a moral high ground where skill and discipline beat chance and terror. We love nicknames. Black Widow fit because it owned the night. But here's another: we earned the farmers with oscilloscopes. We were not born with this skill. We learned it, we shared it, and we produced it faster than the Axis could copy it. The cavity magnetron left the lab. The SCR-720 rode ships. Teenaged controllers in Quonset huts became the most dangerous voices a pilot could hear. That is an American kind of miracle. Knowledge turned into gear, gear turned into doctrine, doctrine turned into safety for sailors sleeping under the guns. Remember the character of the nation behind the glow. The same people who would hand a captured pilot water also denied him the dark he trusted. Mercy and mastery at once. We were harsh when we had to be, and generous when we could be. The technology gave us choices, and free people choose carefully. We saved our ships and our runways because we could see first. When you can see first, you don't have to shoot first. So end where we began, with black ocean and green light. An American pilot breathes steady. An American operator counts pips. The airplane hums like a factory line in the sky. Night is a place, not a mystery. We made it ours to protect our own. Lady in the Dark was one crew on one August night. Yet she was also the sharp front edge of a nation's mind and muscle. The enemy never expected Americans to guide fighters to kills with invisible hands. We did it anyway, and we did it again the next night. The clock started the instant the controller saw the speck. In a stifling Bougainville hut in November 1943, a 19-year-old Marine bent over a scope and snapped, "Vector 310, Angels 5. A Navy F-4, U-2 Corsair, clawed up into moon haze, its AN divided by APS-6 radar glowing in a panel pod. Range 10, 9, come right 2-0. 9 minutes later, the Corsair slid in behind a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber and cut it down with a short burst. The destroyers below heard only the splash. A kid on a radio had just guided naval aviation's first night victory in the Solomons. Why did it work? Because America fused science and teamwork fast. We didn't have this system in 1942. Marines went to Britain, studied GCI, and came home blunt. We had nothing like it. So the Corps created VMFN -531, the first UST night fighter squadron, and the Navy bought radar pods for Corsairs. Controllers learned to read bearing, range, and altitude at once, then speak in short, calm syllables that pilots could follow while flying blind. This was not glamorous. It was better than glamorous. It was repeatable. Feel the room where the war turned. Canvas walls drip. A generator coughs. The controller wipes sweat and tracks 2 green lines as if balancing a glass on each finger. Commit. On the other end, a Corsair pilot with salt on his lips trusts the voice completely. He cannot see the bomber. He can only feel the throttle and hear the clicks. That trust is the hidden weapon in every American cockpit. Freedom teaches people to take responsibility. Combat turns that into calm. Now widen the frame. These were Marines guiding Navy fighters. The next night, an Army Air Force's P-70 or a PV-1 Ventura might be on the line. The services swapped tactics like baseball cards. AAF crews studied Marine intercept tapes. Navy fighter direction units drilled with Marine GCI teams on Empress Augusta Bay. The language stayed the same. Turn, climb, commit. Jointness wasn't a memo, it was a habit. When a system works the same way on every island, the enemy can't find the gaps. The enemy felt that pressure. Japanese snoopers who once skimmed over palm tops to count ships now found an invisible hand pushing them backward. They would black out, dive, and pull hard. But the American voice stayed on them like a conscience. Range 3, 2, contact. The bomber crews learned that darkness had become American territory. That shock breaks morale as surely as flak bursts. Listen for the human heartbeat. I'm not old enough to vote. The controller jokes to the Corsair crew chief on his break. But I can put you on a bogey. He scribbles a letter home in pencil. Mom, I talk pilots into the sky at night. If I say the wrong number, someone dies. So I say the right numbers. He folds the paper. He goes back to the scope. He is 19, and the night listens when he speaks. Here is a fact that should make your jaw tighten. In the Solomons alone, Navy F-4U-2 night fighters left the campaign with multiple victories, and several came under Marine controller vectors. The scoreboard moved because the method worked. Every island added another tent, another set, another teenager with a headset. Every success freed a destroyer crew from a midnight funeral. Every loss taught a lesson that spread by dawn. This system loved discipline and rewarded ingenuity. Crews learned to S-turn, to build closure without overshooting. Controllers practiced cut-off geometry on chalkboards until it lived in their muscles. Hellcat and Corsair pilots learned to trust a tiny radar scope that painted a ghost of the world. The trick was the same every time. Make the intercept simple for the pilot. Compress chaos into 3 words. Then, let American hands do the rest. A prisoner's line makes it real. We thought the jungle and the sea at night were friends, a captured Japanese navigator said. But you had voices there. He meant the controllers. He meant the discipline. He meant the system that stole time from him and gave it to us. Time is the real currency of war. We bought minutes with magnetrons and training. We spent them on victories. The bridge to what comes next is easy to cross. 9 minutes from radar contact to guns on target is not just a story. It is a standard. Once you can do it once, you can teach it. Once you can teach it, you can scale it. After Bougainville, we repeated the ritual on every new strip. Raise the antenna, string the wire, test the set, drill the vectors, and own the night by sundown. An empire of green glows rose from coral and mud. The Corsair taxied back at dawn with salt on its wings and a single victory star chalked under the cockpit. The controller hung his headset on a nail and rubbed his eyes. Ships in Empress Augusta Bay kept steaming. Marines in foxholes rolled over and slept. The night had been loud in one small place and quiet everywhere else. That quiet is what Americans fight for. It is the sound of safety, bought by a teenager with a calm voice and a pilot who believed him. A carrier deck swallowed the sun and kept the war. A lone F6 F5 Newton's Hellcat, the Nightcat, rolled off the bow with an AN divided by APS-6 radar pod tucked under its starboard wing. One pilot, one scope, one ocean to police. The controller's last vector faded in the pilot's ears as he climbed into violet haze. He tapped the instrument glass, trimmed, and watched a tiny blip awaken on the panel display. No wingman, no radar operator, just an American with a machine that made the darkness tell the truth. Here's the problem most people miss. How do you catch a single bomber over black water when your eyes see nothing and your fuel clock is cruel? You make the radar small, the training tight, and the doctrine simple. The AN divided by APS-6 worked in the X-band, painting returns that a single seat could use without drowning in data. It did not replace skill, it rewarded it. The Hellcat pilot learned to split attention between needles and a green glow, to build closure with smooth throttle, to keep hands light while the scope whispered range. The human picture is close and salty. The cockpit smells of hot oil and cordite residue from the last gunnery hop. The pilot hears wind over the canopy and the small click of his oxygen valve. He remembers the instructor's voice. Don't chase the scope. Fly the intercept. He remembers a controller on a training hop saying, trust the numbers. He trusts them now, because America built numbers he could trust. That is the quiet miracle. Instruments that do not lie and people who know what to say. This was not a parlor trick. It was industrial art. The miniaturization that put a radar in a single-seat fighter took magnetron factories, test ranges, and carrier electricians who could keep set and airplane talking on a rolling deck. It took ordnance crews who could swap a pod in rain. It took supply chains that got spare boxes to Pacific atolls faster than rumor. No other nation married scale and finesse like this at sea. The United States Navy could put night eyes on the bow of a ship and keep them there through a typhoon. The enemy learned fast and the hard way. Pilots who once counted on darkness found that even low, even slow, even quiet, an American fighter would appear off their wing with guns cold but position perfect. A few seconds later, those guns were hot. Some nights the Hellcat pilot never fired. The intruder panicked, yanked into a stall, and left a dark scar on the ocean. Other nights the pilot squeezed a short burst, saw flashes, and then saw nothing but black water turning. Either way, the message carried. The night belongs to us now. Quotes carry weight in war because they carry breath. I heard your fighter before I saw it, one Japanese prisoner said after a failed raid. And then I did not see it at all, only the tracers. A Marine night fighter put it another way in his letter home. You feel alone until the beeps make a shape, and then you're not alone, you're hunting. The words are simple, almost childlike. That is their power. Night fighting is complicated in books and very clear in the seat. A statistic makes the point land. Carrier and land-based squadrons equipped with AN divided by APS-6 radar took a doctrine that began in tents and put it on decks, letting single pilots make radar intercepts without a backseater. It wasn't just that we had radar. It was that we had it everywhere, on Corsairs, on Hellcats, on Black Widows, on Venturas, so the method never slept. When every approach path might hold an invisible American, the enemy's calendar changes. Plans shrink. Risk grows teeth. American kindness shows up even here, in the dark. A downed Japanese pilot pulled from a raft, looked around at a flight deck bustling with night gear and asked for water. He got it. He asked what had found him. A crewman tapped the radar pod and said, "This." The prisoner stared at the smooth casing as if it could answer him. It had already answered. It told him that a free nation had put science in the service of discipline, and there was no hiding from that. The bridge to what follows is tight and certain. One pilot with one scope is a promise. We can scale this to every ship, every strip, every island we claim. And we did. Seabees leveled coral for antennas. Radio men strung lines through coconut groves. Controllers drilled the language. Pilots flew the pattern until it felt like tying their shoes. If the enemy shifted tactics, we shifted faster. If weather moved in, we flew through it. If a set failed, a spare came out of its crate. Systems beat surprises. End with the sound you can feel in your chest, the deck whistle, the hook clank, the Hellcat's engine ticking as it cools under stars. The pilot climbs down, salt on his sleeve, and chalks a tiny silhouette on the fuselage. He doesn't brag. He eats. He writes a line, "Saw him first," and he sleeps while another man takes the night watch. That is America at war. Not just bravery. Bravery organized. Not just machines. Machines with purpose. One pilot, one scope, one ocean, one result. The enemy never expected it. We made it routine. A crate leaves a Massachusetts loading dock and changes a war. Inside is a cavity magnetron that once lived in a lab at MIT's radiation laboratory. Now it rides trucks, ships, and bulldozers to a jungle airstrip where a generator coughs to life. A young engineer has signed the shipping tag in pencil. A Marine corporal wipes dust off the stenciled numbers with his sleeve. By nightfall the set will be up, tuned, and speaking a new language bearing, range, height over headphones to a fighter orbiting black water. The lab has become a weapon, the weapon has become a voice. The voice will guide an American to the unseen. The British carried the spark, and we fanned it into a furnace. The Tizard mission brought the magnetron across the Atlantic in 1940. America made it rugged. Western electric machined housings that did not rattle apart on Pacific roads. Raytheon poured power into compact boxes that did not quit in monsoon heat. The SCR-720 nose set our version of the British AI Muck. X sat in the blunt nose of the P-61 Black Widow and turned cloud into glass. On carriers, the AN divided by APS-6 gave single-seat Hellcats and Corsairs radar eyes without a second crewman. That is not an accessory, that is an American way of war. Science, simplified, multiplied. Factories became part of the front line. The same country that built Willow Run to push out B-24 Liberators at a pace measured in minutes also built wave after wave of microwave sets and shipped them like rations. A warehouse clerk in Newark stamped crates for Bougainville and the Marianas and taped a note that read, "Handle like victory." A high school shop teacher in California retrained to solder waveguides and never missed a joint. A Seabee drove a dozer through coral at noon and stuck an antenna into the sky by dusk. Logistics didn't just follow the fight, it arrived ahead of it and laid the wire. Numbers tell the truth even when nobody is looking. By 1944, American radars stood watch on tiny atolls and big decks alike, speaking the same grammar to Marine controllers, Navy pilots, and Army Air Forces crews. The P-61's SCR-720 made the Black Widow a flying ambush. The AN, divided by APS-6, put that power in a single cockpit and spread it across task groups. The result was a method that did not care about weather or moonlight. A young controller could vector, a Ventura, a Corsair, or a Hellcat with the same 3 words: turn, climb, commit, and the night would answer. Listen to the human voice inside the numbers. Every tube we solder means a pilot sees first. A 22-year-old technician wrote to his wife. He had learned the work in a 12-week crash course, then repeated it under a canvas roof, with sweat running down his back. He kept a notebook of voltages and field repairs. He knew the field cure for salt-soaked connectors and the exact number of kicks it took to persuade a bulky generator. We like to tell stories about heroes in cockpits, and we should. But a nation wins when the quiet hands behind the panel never let the scope go dark. Our enemies were clever and brave. They also ran short on time, fuel, and spares. Japanese technicians could assemble a radar, but not dozens for every strip, nor train enough operators to feed a doctrine. The United States didn't just own factories. We owned the feedback loop. A fault report from Bougainville fixed a production change in Boston. A training film on cut-off geometry shot in New Jersey showed up in the Solomons weeks later. The loop kept tightening until the process itself became a weapon. That is how democracies fight, by learning faster and sharing wider. There is a kindness in precision. When radar works, you need fewer bursts, shorter fights, less flak for your own ships to suffer through. A destroyer picket hears, "Turn back, bogey intercepted," and no one writes letters home that night. A pilot follows a voice to a clean shot and goes to breakfast on time. A prisoner pulled from a raft gets water and a blanket, and when he asks what found him, a crewman taps the radome and smiles. Power without cruelty is a signature of free people. The magnetron was small, its mercy was large. If you want the holy smokes moment, take it straight. The P-60, one Black Widow's tally, climbed over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed by 1945. Navy and Marine night fighters with AN divided by APS-6 added more. Some under Marine controller vectors, in the Solomons where this all began. That is, industrial speed translated into night-by-night survival for sailors and aircrews. We did not just add a gadget to an airplane. We rewired the night and handed our pilots a map drawn in electrons. The enemy never saw the ink, only the results. The smell of hot paint, the itch of coral dust, the hum of a newly tuned set. These are the small edges that grow into big victories. A corporal measures antenna azimuth with a grease pencil and a string. A lieutenant checks a stack of training cards, each with a vector problem worked on the back. A cook keeps coffee hot at 0200 because 9-minute intercepts need 9-minute nerves. This is what America looks like when it is serious. Everyone doing a simple thing well and trusting the next person to do the same. The crate that left Massachusetts finds its way to a tent on an island map a school kid couldn't have found in 1941. The set comes alive in green light. The net grows 1 knot tighter. Somewhere out there, a pilot who thought the dark was a friend is about to learn that the United States can share a lesson at the speed of freight. That lesson is still simple and still shocking. We do not just fight. We build, we ship, we teach, and we repeat until the night belongs to us. 3 uniforms share one headset. On the beach at Empress Augusta Bay in early 1944, a Marine controller, a Navy fighter pilot, and an Army Air Forces observer cram under a canvas awning while a radar antenna sweeps the sky. Sweat runs down the Marine's neck as he calls a bearing. The Navy pilot flying a Corsair modified for night reads back in a voice as calm as a church bell. The AAF captain beside the scope scratches geometry arrows on a clipboard and grins when the numbers close fast. The intercept works because the words are short and the trust is long. That habit did not come from a memo. It came from need. VMF N-531 stood up as the first U.S. night fighter squadron and taught by doing. Navy fighter direction teams rotated through the Marine tents to learn the cadence of GCI vectors. Army night fighter crews dropped by with P-70 seconds and then with P-61 seconds to swap tapes and debriefs. The vocabulary narrowed to a few clean words: turn, climb, commit, so stress could not confuse it. America's strength here was not just radar. It was trust made simple enough to survive rain, heat, and fear. You can see the method in the small things. A Marine sergeant pins a hand-drawn map to a crate and marks friendly lanes with a grease pencil. A Navy radioman checks call signs against a chalkboard so no one talks over a rescue flight. An AAF mechanic shows a young Marine how to baby a bulky SCR-720 with a blanket and a blowtorch when a squall rolls through. A Seabee runs a trench so the power cable won't pool water. None of these details look heroic. Put them together and a night becomes defendable. Names make it real, and there are many we could honor. The 421st Night Fighter Squadron learned the jungle rhythm in New Guinea and brought that rhythm to the Philippines. The 6th NFS kept watch over Saipan as B-29 seconds began their long climbs to Japan. The 418th NFS moved from the Solomons to the Central Pacific and left a wake of lessons every unit could use. VMF N-533 hunted from Ii Shima toward Okinawa and brought the F6, F5 Newtons into rough, wet nights with grit and humor. These units lived as neighbors more than rivals. Airfields were crowded and the radios were busy. Cooperation was survival, not a slogan. A single page from a debrief tells the story. A Marine controller guides a Navy Hellcat onto a bogey at Angels 6, a P-60. One reports in the sector and holds west to avoid fratricide. The controller's tone never changes. Turn starboard. Steady. Commit. The Hellcat pilot answers with 2 words. Tally, firing, and then silence as the guns speak for him. The P-61 calls visual friendly a minute later and moves to guard a second blip. 3 services, 1 plan, 0 drama. The target splashes and the net closes over the gap it came through. Our enemies respected that calm. A Japanese pilot captured after a failed run over Torokina listened to the playback of his last minutes and shook his head. Many voices speak as one, he said through an interpreter. He was not being poetic. He was naming what beat him. Even the most skilled crews cannot fight confusion and a coordinated adversary at the same time. We removed confusion from our side of the sky and left it on theirs. We should pause for a moment to honor how young so many were. Teenagers handled IFF codes that could prevent tragedy. 20-year-old controllers learned to assign altitudes so that an eager pilot did not climb into friendly guns. A lieutenant with only months in service could wave off a colonel if the picture turned ugly. And the colonel obeyed the voice because the voice owned the truth on the scope. Rank bowed to clarity. That, too, is an American advantage born of a republic where authority serves the mission, not the other way around. The holy smokes facts stack up fast when systems click. In the Solomons, Navy F-4U-2 night fighters claimed multiple victories under Marine controller vectors as the method matured. Black Widows added their heavy punch where weather made carrier decks treacherous and long endurance made orbiting practical. Destroyers on radar picket stations reported nights with no hits at all because fighters pushed the fight outward and broke up bogey trains far from the gun line. These are not paper wins. They are sailors sleeping through midnight for the first time in weeks. A POW's line can hold more power than a statistics page. I heard your controller in the pilot's voice, a Japanese navigator confessed, as if someone else flew the plane. He meant the confidence. He meant the calm authority born of training. That is what jointness does when it is real. It lets people borrow each other's strength at speed. In a tent city on a hot bay, America did exactly that until it felt natural. We loved our nicknames because they made a hard thing friendly. The Black Widow owned the night with long legs and hard punch. The Nightcat Hellcat turned carrier decks into watchtowers. Seabees made mountains move for antennas, and then threw a barbecue when the net came alive. Coast watchers fed whispers that radar turned into vectors. These names hide sweat and pay tribute at the same time. When a country fights as one neighborhood, victory sounds like a roll call. This chapter leads straight to the ugliest test, Okinawa. Everything we built would be strained there, radar pickets threatened by swarms, controllers juggling dozens of tracks, pilots taking vectors into moonless chaos. Could the language hold? Could the teamwork flex without breaking? The enemy was about to throw everything at the night. We would answer with what free people do best, stand shoulder to shoulder and keep talking until the danger breaks on us and rolls away. A destroyer on radar picket hears a voice that sounds like home. Hellcat inbound, the controller says, as a thin blip angles down from the north. It is April 1945, and the sea around Okinawa is crowded with ships, smoke, and nerves. The picket station floats far from the main fleet like a goalkeeper, alone and necessary. A night fighter reaches its orbit, lights out, radar on, and the station breathes again because help now has teeth. Here is the problem most people miss, and it is the one that breaks or saves fleets. Could radar-guided night fighters thin out raids before they hit the line when attacks came in low, fast, and often at dusk or after dark? The enemy massed pilots who believed the ocean was a runway and the night a cloak. Controllers had seconds to build a picture and pilots had fuel measured like sand in a glass. The answer came from the system we had honed in tents and on decks across the Pacific. Calm voices, clean vectors, and faith under pressure. The first week told the truth. Kamikaze groups probed for holes. A blip would bloom near a picket, then fade, then split into three. Controllers sorted tracks, assigned altitudes, and pushed F6, F5 Newtons, Hellcats, and P-61 Black Widows toward the threat lines. On Shima VMF, N, -533 and the 548th Night Fighter Squadron flew hard nights against low intruders. Into this chaos the geometry held. Turn starboard, steady, commit. When the language is simple, courage has room to work. The smell of salt and cordite mixed on those decks. A Black Widow from Shima rolled into a firing pass and watched a target vanish into the sea, either hit or panicked into a kill it made on itself. A Hellcat from a carrier slashed across a radar line and never saw more than sparks and a splash. A Ventura crew kept station over a picket and called out bogies for another squadron to finish. You push the fight away, and you keep pushing until dawn. The enemy tried every trick. They came in singles and strings. They coasted low under lumpy weather and then popped up into the black to throw off a scope. They called false bearings in Japanese and English, but the picture stayed glued together because the people did. The controller, who had not slept more than 3 hours at a time all week, still sounded like a man reading church announcements. The fighter pilot, who had eaten nothing but coffee and crackers, still flew smooth and trusted the numbers. A captured trainee later said, "We launched at dusk. Your fighters found us over black water." He was surprised by how early the intercepts happened. He expected flak at the line, not fighters at the horizon. That shock matters, because it changes what commanders dare to attempt. When early losses and turnbacks mount, fewer sorties launch the next night. The math of courage tightens against the attacker when the defender can see first. The statistics from Okinawa look impossible until you remember how big the fight was. Japan flung thousands of sorties at the island and the fleet. 36 American ships were sunk and hundreds damaged during the campaign, grim receipts that prove how hard the battle slammed. But every night fighter intercept that ended over dark water saved a hull and a crew that will never appear on a casualty list. The scoreboard for radar is not only bodies of enemy aircraft, it is empty hospital cots and quiet radios. Even in this storm, the American character showed. A pilot brought down near a picket station hitched a ride in a whaleboat, soaked and laughing, and asked the coxswain if his vector sounded as smooth as it felt. "Smooth as ice," the sailor said, and passed him a canteen. On the Shima, a Marine crew chief kept a battered Black Widow flying by, cannibalizing parts from a wreck and writing the paperwork later. On a destroyer, a cook passed out extra eggs after a long night because you feed the hands that kept the ship alive. Jointness did not crack under pressure. It flexed. Navy and Marine controllers swapped frequencies and sectors when sets hiccuped. AAF Black Widows took sectors when weather-grounded carriers. Coast watchers passed whispers that became intercept headings. Seabees fixed power at picket sites with a hammer and a prayer. The machine worked because the people were allowed to solve problems without waiting for permission. That is a free nation's secret weapon. The enemy saw the net but could not cut it. A Japanese officer captured after the campaign admitted they had tried to time launches for moon gaps and weather breaks, only to find American fighters already waiting in the dark. "Many eyes," he said, and left it there. Many eyes indeed on masts, in noses, and on hills, and one language of vectors tying them together. When a nation can make strangers work like a single crew by phone, night becomes a smaller place. There is a horror to picket duty that honest history owes a salute. Some stations were hit hard despite all the science and all the courage. Lives were lost buying minutes for the fleet. But even on those worst nights, radar-guided fighters pulled fangs from attacks that might have been worse. You cannot count the ships that were not struck, only the ones that were. Yet that shadow count is the point. The system saved people you will never meet and names you will never read. We close this night with the sound of an engine cooling on a dark strip, the click-tick that every pilot knows. A Hellcat pilot writes, "Saw him first," on a scrap of paper and sticks it under a kneeboard strap for luck. A controller folds into a camp chair for 13 minutes of sleep and dreams of a scope with no blips. A destroyer picket rolls in the swell while its captain writes, "No hits tonight," and underlines it twice. The question we asked at the start had an American answer. Yes, we can thin the darkness and push danger back. A bulldozer blade bites coral at noon, and the Pacific answers at night. Seabees drop pierced steel planking in shining rows, string wire through coconut groves, and by sunset a radar antenna points at the stars, like a question mark that already knows the answer. The generator coughs, the scope warms, and an air warning team calls out a calibration track to a circling Ventura. In one day, a bare island becomes a night fortress. That is how America fights. We build the tool, we build the place for the tool, and we build the people who can run it in the dark. Names matter because people do the work. A Marine Air Warning Detachment drags its SCR-270 early warning set under canvas and pairs it with a shorter-range GCI unit so controllers can talk fighters from the first faint return to visual. An IFF Mark III rack glows on a side table, ready to answer friend or foe in a second, that can save a life. Down the strip, VMF N night fighter crews run touch and goes in F6, F5Ns, while an AAF P-61 orbit tests the nose-mounted SCR-720 against mountain clutter. The vocabulary is small on purpose. Turn, climb, commit. Simple words win complex nights. You can smell the work, hot paint, ozone from a newly tuned transmitter, the wet iron of PSP after rain. A CB corporal chalks azimuth with a string and a grease pencil. A Navy electrician checks continuity in a radio box. A Marine controller sips coffee gone cold and writes down wind direction that will matter in the dark. None of this looks heroic from the air. Up close it is all edge, the little sharp things that cut big problems down to size. Americans collect edges and then use them together. Speed is the shock. An island that offered no shelter in the morning becomes a nest of eyes by dusk. A Japanese snooper expects silence, and instead hears the quick, short syllables of an intercept in progress. A fighter he cannot see moving to a point he did not think anyone knew. That is not luck. That is mobility married to logistics. Seabees who pour a footing at noon pour coffee at midnight for the controller, who just turned a blip into a save. We loved nicknames because they make hard jobs feel like friends. Nightcats for the Hellcats, Black Widows for the P-61 seconds, beehives for CB camps that never slept. The nicknames carry a truth. Our machines had character, and our units had personalities that fit together. The Black Widow's long legs held the net open. The Night Cat's quick claws closed it. The Seabee's grin kept the generator dry through a squall, and the antenna straight in a gale. A nation of neighbors can do hard things because they know each other's strengths. A prisoner's memory pins the feeling to the wall. We lifted at dusk, a captured navigator said, and the island we scouted yesterday now spoke with many voices. He meant the radar huts. He meant the radio discipline that turned squiggles into orders. He meant the feeling of being seen. The shock a pilot feels when he learns that darkness has rules, and the Americans write them, is not just fear. It is respect. It is the beginning of the end for bold plans. The sets were real, and so were the numbers behind them. The SCR-270 cast a wide net. The SCR-527 and later GCI gear tightened the mesh. The SCR 720 inches. The P-61 and the AN divided by APS 6 inches single-seat fighters put the last thread exactly where it needed to be on a gun sight. An air warning squadron could raise a site in hours, train local traffic into its picture in days, and hand fighters a clean intercept by the first good night. When you can set up a system that fast, geography stops being an enemy and becomes a schedule. This is the American habit that carried the war. We make the exceptional routine. The first tent city to speak vectors felt like a miracle. The fifth felt like a template. The 10th was a checklist on a clipboard spattered with rain. That is not the death of romance. That is the birth of confidence. A young controller arriving at a new strip knew what the map would look like, where the antenna would stand, how the wire would run, and what words he would say at 0200 when a blip appeared at Angels 5. Generosity walked the perimeter with power. A downed Japanese pilot pulled out of a lagoon, blinked at the antenna looming on a ridge, and asked for water. A Seabee handed him a canteen and tapped the steel mast with a knuckle. "That found you," he said, not boastful, just factual. The prisoner drank and stared as if the metal might speak. It had already spoken, in vectors and calm voices, and a black airplane that had glided past his wing without lights. Holy smokes, facts sit under all this quiet. We fielded airborne radar in single-seat fighters at sea and twin-engine hunters ashore. We knit those eyes to ground sets that could read bearing, range and altitude, and to IFF that kept friendlies safe. We did it not once but again and again, from Bougainville to Saipan to Ieshima, until new airfields were born knowing how to talk at night. A free nation, rich in know-how and stubborn in habit, turned impossible by dusk into operational by dark. The night proves character. The radios pick up breath and doubt. The scopes forgive nothing. In that place our people were calm and our machines were honest, and the combination turned the Pacific into a classroom where we taught a hard lesson. You can arrive in darkness, but you cannot hide in it. Seabees and Scopes wrote that sentence together. It sounded like a generator starting. It looked like an antenna rising. It felt like safety rolling in on a warm wind. And by the next afternoon, if weather knocked a mast down or a cable smoked, American hands had it fixed, and American pilots were back in the sky, orbiting the place where the sea kisses the night. We built. We repaired. We repeated. That is how a republic wins far from home. A chalk mark on a Black Widow's nacelle means a life not lost at sea. Another silhouette under a Hellcat's cockpit means a picket ship did not take a fireball at 0200. Counting kills is the easy part. Counting saves is where the truth hides. The United States learned to do both at once. We kept score in a way that told the fleet what mattered most. Did our people sleep? Did our convoys pass? Did the dawn show ships still in line? The numbers start with a headline and climb from there. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow, carrying the SCR 720 inches its nose, destroyed 127 enemy aircraft across theaters by war's end. That is not a rumor, it is a receipt. Add in Navy and Marine night fighters F-4U-2 Corsairs and F-6 F-5 Newtons, Hellcats guided by controllers on islands and carriers, and the tally rises by dozens more. In the Solomons, Several of those Navy victories came under Marine vectors, proof that joint language made bullets count. But the scoreboard of the night is bigger than silhouettes. A destroyer captain who writes, "No hits tonight" has numbers on his side too, even if they hide in quiet logs. A convoy that rounds a headland at dawn because night fighters pushed raiders off their track is a row of lives not tallied on any wall. Radar turns prevention into strategy. It changes the math from "how many did we shoot down" to "how many never came close." That shift is American because it values safety as victory and does the arithmetic to back it up. Listen to the men keeping that ledger. "I never saw their faces," a radar operator wrote, "but I saw the blip fade when it mattered." He had learned to think in miles per minute and to speak in verbs, not nouns. Turn, climb, commit. He knew the sweetness of a silent radio after a clean intercept and the sick music of a scramble that arrives a minute late. He did not love silhouettes under the cockpit. He loved empty hospital cots on the beach. We used everything that worked, and we used it everywhere. Black widows, with long legs orbited wide and high, ready to pounce on bogies that slipped past picket screens or tried to come in over the hills. Nightcats on carriers leapt like cats from a fence, clawing for altitude, using AN divided by APS-6 to build a shape out of static and closing before a raider could choose targets. PV-1 Venturas, with radar and teeth-filled gaps, called contacts, and sometimes took the shot themselves. The machine mattered, the method mattered more. The enemy noticed the change in outcomes. A Japanese officer debriefed after capture called night approaches, a lottery that no longer favored us. He meant that the odds had turned. The first surprise was gone. Early losses bit deep. Long detours burned fuel. Some crews turned back. Those who pressed on hit picket stations that shot straighter because fighters had thinned the swarm. You cannot chart the raid that never formed. You can feel its absence in the way a gun crew jokes on the midwatch. We told the truth with simple measures on the ground. How many scramble bells rang last night? How many ended with splash outside the screen? How many picket stations logged no contacts? These were numbers a corporal could chart with chalk and make a captain's heart steady. They were also the kind of measures a democracy respects, practical, human, unglamorous. We wanted ships alive and boys asleep. Radar, vectors, and disciplined flying made those good numbers show up more often. There were nights we lost. Okinawa proved that. Picket ships burned. Crews went into the water. We honor them because their sacrifice bought time for the fleet and the island. But even on hard nights, the saves stacked up. Black widows chased intruders into the ocean. Hellcats ran interference beyond the screen. Controllers pushed bogies to places where flak could find them before they found transports. The next morning's tally might look grim on the left side of the board and still hide 100 small victories on the right. The most American part of this arithmetic is how the people doing it thought. They liked clear goals. They liked fairness. They measured success by the safety of strangers. A teenage controller felt richer for a quiet hour than for a dramatic one. A pilot wrote home that his best mission was a night when he never fired because the bogey turned back at the last minute and vanished into cloud. We are a nation that keeps score and also knows when not to brag. Holy smokes, facts belong in the ledger too. A single airplane, Lady in the Dark, forced 2 enemy fighters to destruction without firing, in separate incidents in the final days of the war. What looks like a trick is actually a perfect intercept turned into pressure the foe could not handle. Multiply that kind of control across squadrons, and you get nights when the map shows fewer lines pointing at the fleet. You get days when engineers can unload fuel drums instead of coffins. A POW's voice closes the FERT lesson. "Our commander said you would be blind at night like us," he told an interpreter. "But your machines and your voices did not sleep." Machines and voices. The right summary. The voices were controllers speaking clear English that anyone could learn to copy, so we trained copyists by the hundreds. The machines were rugged sets anyone with a manual and stubbornness could keep alive, so we trained stubbornness by the thousands. The result was a score that kept Americans safe and kept pressure on enemies until options ran dry. End with a picture of the quiet victory. A destroyer picket rides low in the dawn after a long night. Its captain writes "no hits" and underlines it twice. On the beach, a controller hangs his headset and logs his last vector. In a revetment, a crew chief rubs off last night's salt and chalks a small mark below a cockpit. We count kills because they are visible. We count saves because we are grown-ups. America owned the night because we counted both and built systems that delivered more of the second every week. A Japanese technician stands over a precious black box on a wooden bench and hears the war ticking. The airborne radar set is clever, fragile, and late. The instruction manual is thin, and the spares drawer is almost empty. He looks out the window at a J-1N-1S Gecko night fighter and wonders how many crews will actually fly with the new set before the next airfield falls. He is competent and proud, but trapped in a system without parts, training, time. Start with timing. American night fighter units began hunting in the Solomons in late 1943, and by mid-1944, the method GCI from ground sets to airborne radar intercepts was routine from island to island. Japan's airborne microwave sets appeared in small numbers around that same time. Crews learned new instruments while flying from fields under daily pressure. A few units made the gear sing. Most made do with darkness alone. War punishes the late more than it paid, rewards the brave. Then face production. The United States did not only make radar, we made it in volume and in versions that fit different jobs. SCR-270 and other long-range sets watched the approaches. Medium-range GCI units tightened the picture. The SCR-720 rode in P-61 noses, and AN divided by APS-6 hung under single-seat wings at sea. Each had a supply chain, a repair culture, a training path. Japan fielded good sets, but in small batches. The pipeline from factory to front was thin and often cut. Doctrine matters as much as gadgets. America built a language that any service could speak. Turn, climb, commit. Controllers trained to think in cut-off geometry and to talk pilots through blind merges. Pilots trained to trust voices and scopes without seeing a target until the last seconds. Marines taught Navy teams. AAF crews traded debriefs with both. Japan had brave night fighters and skilled technicians, but ground control and fighter direction were scattered, interrupted, and too often rebuilt from scratch. Fuel and pilots are the dark tide behind every technology story. America, with its refineries and tankers, kept fighters on readiness at night without starving daytime operations. We rotated pilots, respected crew rest when we could, and let teenagers grow into experts over months. Japan fought a defensive war on a shrinking map with fuel ships hunted and training time squeezed. A new radar set means little if the crew flies on fumes and fear. That is not a moral judgment, it is arithmetic. The enemy felt the difference. "We thought your radar would be only on ships," one prisoner said, but it was in many airplanes. He had seen AN divided by APS-6 under Hellcat wings and P-60, one noses like lanterns with no light. He learned that even when weather-grounded patrols, the first clear patch brought a voice in his headphones, speaking vectors he did not want to hear. "Many eyes," a Japanese officer said after capture, summing up what radar plus doctrine becomes when it multiplies across a theater. Holy smokes, facts make the gap visible to anyone with a map. America put radar on carriers, on destroyer masts, on island ridges, and in fighter noses. We did not just see. We acted on what we saw the same minute. The Black Widow's tally over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed by 1945 sits beside carrier night fighter scores and convoy saves as proof that our system scaled. Japan's night fighter successes, brave and real, did not multiply fast enough to change the tide. The ocean is big, systems must be bigger. There was another difference, quieter but deep. A free country lets the right voice command when it must. A sergeant controller could wave off a senior pilot if the picture turned ugly. A young lieutenant could teach a captain a new glide slope and be heard. That habit cannot be ordered into existence. It is grown. Japan's services carried courage and skill, but their structures bent less toward bottom-up corrections under stress. In a technology fight, fast correction is survival. We should honor competence on both sides to keep the history honest. Japanese engineers built sets that worked. Pilots flew hard nights in machines not built for the task. Ground crews kept gear alive with tools and grit. That is bravery under the worst odds. The point is not that they lacked genius. It is that they lacked the nation-sized engine room that America brought to bear. Universities, factories, railroads, shipyards, and a culture of teaching at speed. We fought with a chorus behind every cockpit. Quotes carry breath across years, so let them close the case. We heard Americans had radar in one-seat fighters. A Japanese ground crewman admitted. We laughed. Then we stopped laughing. A Marine controller gave the mirror line in a letter home. We put eyes on planes that had none yesterday. The exchange is simple and final. Surprise lives in firsts. Dominance lives in repeats. We owned the night because we could do the hard thing again tomorrow and teach a newcomer how before lunch. If you want the smell and grit of the Gap, stand in 2 rooms. In one, an American tent hums with an SCR 527, an IFF rack, a chalkboard of call signs, and a coffee pot. In the other, a Japanese hut holds a single precious set, a smudged manual, and a technician praying a generator will last until the flight lands. Both rooms hold pride. Only one holds margin. Margin is what lets a pilot go around and try again, what lets a controller make one more vector, what lets a nation absorb a setback and come back stronger that same night. End with the cold math and the warm truth. Cold math. Late entry, low production, cut lines of supply, scattered doctrine add those, and night fighting becomes a hope, not a system. Warm truth. A republic that shares knowledge like water, that trusts a steady young voice on a scope, that builds spares by the crate, will make even midnight a friendly hour. The enemy never expected Americans to guide fighters to kills at will. By 1945, the surprise was gone. Only the results remained, and they lit the way home. A German night fighter ace leaned over a map of the Ruhr and admitted something no enemy wants to say out loud. The Allies had put radar into airplanes so small and steady that they could lift a single blip out of a sky full of confusion, like picking raisins out of a cake. He meant the British Mosquito night fighters with AI Mark X in the nose. He also meant the American SCR 720, our build of that same set, carried into the dark by the P-61 Black Widow. Europe taught the world a hard lesson. If your opponent can see at night from the cockpit, the hunt is over before it begins. That lesson crossed oceans. It sat in a Northrop nose cone over Saipan and Itazuke. It glowed green on scopes off Okinawa. It changed the way the Pacific breathed after sunset. The shock in Europe came first and fast. The Kammhuber line had been a wall of searchlights and ground radars and Himmelbett beds designed to feed German night fighters onto RAF bombers. It worked until it didn't. Once the Mosquito began ranging with AI radar, once the Allies jammed and slipped, the wall cracked. The Germans tried free hunt tactics, wild boar in the dark, but the Mosquito was too quick and too quiet. The point is not to tell a European story in a Pacific book. It is to show the same electronics, the same doctrine, the same courage, moving through factories and into noses under different stars. When a tool proves itself in the bloodiest test and then sails to a new theatre, the second theatre is living in the future. Now bring the camera back to American hands. Our engineers took the magnetron, made it rugged, drew up the SCR 720, and taught crews to use it with short words and steady breath. Our factories milled housings that did not shake apart on coral runways. Our training commands wrote cut-off geometry in chalk until it lived in fingers and feet. Then we raised the ante. We miniaturized into the AN divided by APS-6, hung on the starboard wing of a single-seat Navy fighter, and told a 19-year-old pilot, "You have night eyes now. Go use them." That is an American sentence. It trusts the individual, and it depends on the team. A Luftwaffe prisoner told his interrogator that the most unnerving thing was not the bombers but the little fighters that came out of nowhere, found him without lights, and disappeared just as quickly. He had no reason to flatter us. He was telling the truth the way soldiers tell it when the shooting stops. He felt hunted by math, range, bearing, altitude, closure, a voice in another language saying numbers with a calm he could not shake. The Pacific version of that fear sounded the same in Japanese. When a Hellcat with AN divided by APS-6 slid into a tail at midnight, the pilot on the other side felt a shadow touch his shoulder. Holy smokes comes in hard figures. The P-61 Black Widow, with the SCR-720 and a crew trained to trust it, destroyed 127 enemy aircraft across the war. That tally includes Europe and the Pacific, and it tells a simple truth. The set worked wherever the cockpit did. In the Solomons, Navy F-4 U-2 seconds, and later F-6 F-5Ns, used the same schoolhouse language to make kills under marine controller vectors. At Okinawa, the same radar lineage guided fighters to intruders before they reached picket guns. This is not a gadget story. This is a doctrine story powered by industry. The human picture bridges continents. A Black Widow radar operator at Saipan listens to the same kind of returns that a Mosquito navigator once read over Norfolk. The shapes on the scope are different. The breath in the headset is the same. A controller on Ishima uses geometry learned from a film shot in New Jersey and tactics polished over Bougainville to talk a Hellcat pilot into tally firing. A German ace in a cell and a Japanese pilot in a raft each give voice to the same shock. Night is no longer neutral ground. The Americans made it theirs by learning faster and producing more. We do not need to brag to be proud. Our people took an idea, proven in British hands, made it a little tougher, made it a lot more numerous, and pushed it onto every corner of a giant map. That is the American gift scale with soul. The soul shows in the way a sergeant's voice could turn a colonel's airplane, in the way a kid with a headset took responsibility for a ship he would never see, in the way a CB grinned at a prisoner and tapped the radome. This is how we found you. There is a clean line from a European quote about currants in a cake to a Pacific image of Lady in the Dark easing a frightened enemy into the sea without firing a shot. Both moments are about control. Control in the cockpit, control in the radio net, control in the supply chain that kept the boxes humming. It feels almost unfair until you remember how much sweat and grief it took to get there. The Allies earned that control in burning cities and on torn runways. America carried it forward to save sailors, win islands, and shorten a war. End with an echo you can hear in your ribs. A German pilot says, with a small shrug, "Your airborne radar was everywhere." A Japanese navigator, staring at a wing pod on a carrier, whispers, "I did not know one pilot could do that alone." Different languages, same verdict. We took the best idea in the darkest fight, made it our own, and then made it common. That is how a free nation wins. The enemy never expected Americans would guide night fighters to kills with such ease. We made ease out of hard work and sent it across an ocean. A destroyer picket rides the dawn swell with coffee steaming on the bridge, and one sentence underlined twice in the log, "No hits tonight." That line hides 100 moving parts that all did their jobs. A Black Widow from the 548th Night Fighter Squadron took a vector from Ishima. A Navy F-6 F-5 Newtons from a carrier task group slid in low with AN divided by APS-6 whispering range. A Marine controller at a shoreline tent turned chaos into 3 clean words. Somewhere out over black water, intruders broke up, turned back, or died. Counting kills is easy. Counting saves is how you tell the truth. The Pacific was a machine that ran on fuel, nerves, and time. Night fighters gave all 3 back to us. A raid broken up 50 miles out meant destroyer crews did not fight to exhaustion at 0200. A convoy slipped through a choke point without flares lighting the sky. A B-29 strip at dawn did not smell like burned rubber and cordite. It smelled like diesel and frying eggs. Logistics is victory wearing work clothes. Radar-guided intercepts put clean shirts on men who would otherwise have written letters on hospital cots. The enemy tried to force the schedule. Over Okinawa in 1945, waves came at the pickets and the line Kikusui attacks that slammed like weather. 36 American ships were sunk and hundreds damaged in the campaign, numbers that make your throat tighten. Now add the shadow numbers. How many blips faded under a Black Widow's wing? How many pilots dove at the last second and hit the sea without a shot fired, like the victims of Lady in the Dark? How many formations frayed on approach when a Hellcat appeared at the wrong place at the right time? The map of saved lives looks blank. That is its beauty. A radar operator wrote, "I never saw their faces, but I saw the blip fade when it mattered. That is the heart of prevention. You work for an absence. You cheer for a quiet radio. You keep your voice level even when the scope blossoms with 3, then 5, then 7 returns. The pilot on the other end feels that calm like a hand on his shoulder. He flies the numbers. He makes the cutoff. He squeezes once and then he is gone into the night again, already thinking about fuel and the next vector. The tools that made absence possible had names that deserve saying. SCR 270, early warning on the ridge. SCR 527 and other GCI sets tied to IFF Mark III to sort friend from foe. SCR 720 inches, the Black Widow's nose. AN, divided by APS-6 under a Corsair or Hellcat wing. Each box had a manual, and each manual had hands that turned pages until the words turned into muscle. Every set that stayed up through rain carved one more minute off danger. Every spare part that arrived on time added a notch to the quiet ledger. A Japanese officer captured after the fighting said the most demoralizing thing was not flak or fighters he could see. It was the feeling of being watched at the horizon. He launched at dusk, believing in the old math. Distance plus darkness equals safety. Then vectors came over the ocean, and suddenly he flew in a tunnel of numbers he did not control. He still had courage. He still pressed. But he knew now that the night had rules, and that Americans wrote them in green light. Holy smokes, facts fit this kind of war too. A single P-61 scored 2 no-shots kills by forcing enemies into the sea. That is not only a great story. It is a model of what radar dominance does. It moves fights away from ships. It shortens engagements. It lets pilots keep ammo for the next pass. Multiply that by squadrons and task groups, and you get whole nights when the picket station marks no hits and underlines it twice. The fleet survives because math bends in our favor. We kept score the way grown-ups do. How many scrambles ended before the line? How many pickets logged clear after midnight? How many bogies turned back without a single friendly casualty? Commanders read those numbers and moved fuel and sleep like ammunition. A teenager with a headset did not know he was shifting campaign statistics as he spoke a vector. He only knew that his words gave a pilot more time. Time wins wars. American character shows in the spaces between missions. A downed Japanese pilot pulled from a raft was handed a blanket and a cup of water on a destroyer deck that still smelled of cordite. He asked, "What found me?" A sailor tapped the smooth belly of a radar pod and said, "This," and a voice you didn't hear. There is power in that kind of mercy. It says we do not hate you, but we will end your mission. It says we will keep our people safe and keep our souls too. End with a quiet montage. A Hellcat taxis in and an ordnance man runs a finger over empty gun ports and smiles at the best kind of mission. A controller hangs his headset, rubs eyes that have stared at green too long, and writes a line in a log that no one will ever visit in a museum. A destroyer's captain folds his arms and watches the sun climb out of a clean horizon. The raids that never happened are the real monument. We built them out of electrons, discipline, and love for the strangers asleep below. The last weeks of the war feel like an answer key. An American controller says, "Turn starboard, steady, commit," and a Black Widow slides into a perfect place in the dark. A carrier, born Hellcat with AN divided by APS-6, taps a glowing panel, and follows a single pip across moon-silvered water. A picket destroyer logs no hits, and the crew finally sleeps without boots by the rack. This is what ownership looks like. It is not loud, it is steady. It is the night doing what free people ask it to do. Start with the impossible that turned out to be routine. A purpose-built night fighter, the P-61 Black Widow, carried the SCR 720 inches its nose and destroyed 127 enemy aircraft by war's end. A Navy Hellcat, the F-6 F-5 Newtons, and the Marine and Navy Corsair, the F-4U-2 and later Night Mods, put the AN divided by APS-6 under a single wing and turned one pilot into a hunting team of one. Marine VMF N -531 proved the method in the Solomons. VMF N -533 watched from Shima toward Okinawa. The 421st, 418th, and 548th Night Fighter Squadrons wrote the same 3 words in debrief after debrief. Turn, climb, commit. Numbers this clean aren't luck. They are a nation keeping promises to itself. The results feel unreal until you match them to faces. Lady in the Dark forced 2 enemies into the sea without firing. Navy night fighters scored Solomon's victories under Marine controller vectors when the idea was still young. Black Widows stalked low intruders off Okinawa and cut loss chains before they reached the picket line. The effect spreads like a tide going out. Fewer torches on the water, fewer letters home, more ships in line at dawn. You can count silhouettes under cockpits. You can also count breakfasts eaten in peace. We proved something deeper than technical edge. We proved that American values turn into military power when you let people use their heads and hands. Teenagers ran scopes and spoke like steady old men. Sergeants told officers to wave off and were obeyed because truth owns rank in a republic. Engineers who once built radios for colleges soldered waveguides that rode to Bougainville in crates stamped with towns you can still drive through today. Seabees turned coral into antenna farms by late afternoon and grilled steaks on 55-gallon drums after midnight. Winning looked like home far from home. The enemy's verdict is the most honest measure. German aces, said Allied airborne radar plucked fighters out of a sky, the way fingers pick raisins out of a cake. Japanese prisoners spoke of the shock of being met at the horizon by unseen airplanes, guided by calm voices. None of them accused us of magic. They described a system ground sets like SCR-270 and SCR-527 for the wide picture, IFF Mark III, to keep friends safe. Airborne sets like SCR-720 and AN divided by APS-6 to finish the work, and a language that made strangers act like a single crew. When your opponent recites your method back to you, you own the fight. Holy Smokes belongs in the final scene. We built an airborne radar small enough for a 1-seat fighter, and we put it on carriers rocked by typhoons. We created a night fighter that could force a kill without firing, and did it more than once. We mass-produced magnetrons so fast that broken boxes were sad, not scary, because another crate was already on the beach. We took a joint playbook from a sweaty tent in the Solomons and ran it from coral strips and steel decks all the way to the edge of Japan. The darkest hours bent to our will. We also kept our humanity, and that matters most when the lights are out. A rescued enemy pilot got a blanket and water on a deck that smelled of fuel and salt. A controller closed his eyes for 10 minutes and woke to give back another ship's worth of sleep. A Hellcat pilot wrote on a scrap, "Saw him first," and tucked it into his checklist as a lucky charm, because being first to see meant someone else's mother did not get a telegram. Power with mercy is the American signature. Radar just extended the reach of both. Ownership of the night is not a boast, it is a duty carried out. It is the discipline to keep the set dry, to check the cable, to practice vector drills when no one is looking. It is the patience to teach a sun-up new crew the geometry, and then trust them with a sector on their second week. It is pride without noise. The best night was always the one when nothing bad happened, and that is how you know we grew up as a nation while we grew strong. So take the last look. The scope sweeps and finds nothing. The controller writes a neat line in a book. The pilot taxis in and hands a thumbs up to a crew chief with salt in his hair. Far out to sea, a picket station watches the sun break and hears only engines and gulls. The numbers on the board: 127 Black Widow victories, Navy and Marine night tallies, raids turned back at the rim, are real and cold and good. The warmth comes from what those numbers protected. We owned the night so that men could live to see the morning, and a free people could steer the war toward home.